making and keeping covenant with ourselves. The idea for this sermon came somewhat unbidden to me, and it sounded like a pretty good topic. And Reverend Robin, she liked it too, so that was like a bonus. So I was off. Yet when I started to think and write on it, I was really flummoxed. Because what does that even mean? Covenant with yourself. Is it simply a sort of a schmancier version of making New Year's resolutions? Well, anyway, after spending some time with the topic, I do now have some ideas, thank goodness, because it's Sunday. A few times during the sermon, I may offer you the opportunity, if you choose, to take a moment for a specific practice, like what we did in the meditation. As a new UU, my first experience with living the covenant of the 7 principles, which, if you happen to be visiting, are on, I think, the inside of the back flap of your order. So anyway, the first experience with living that covenant came about while Beacon was doing the work to become a welcoming congregation, which was quite some time ago, approximately 19 years. One of our lay leaders, May Daniels, had organized a Saturday workshop, and I went with a friend. Part of the day included a panel discussion, pretty much designed to help straight folk get acquainted with LGBTQ+ community people. During the panel discussion, each person shared something of their life and what it's meant to them to be gay, bi, etc. Well, the last person to speak was, I'm going to call her Brienne. That's not a real name. She was M to F trans. I was so moved by her story. The emotional and physical difficulties, losing relationship with her wife, her children, other relatives, just lots of pain. And yet she showed a great deal of joy and positivity. I stayed behind during a break and spoke with her. She told the most fascinating stories. One was how when her wife would leave the house, Brian would become Brienne. Brian had built false drawers in the workbench in the basement, and that's where he hid poodle skirts, petticoats, and size 12 pumps. I thought I would get a laugh out of that. Well, for as long as Brienne was alone at home in the house, she could clean and dust and luxuriate in being able to be dressed just exactly as she wanted and be more herself. There was this joy, this glow about her when she described that, wearing pearls like something out of, Leave It to Beaver or something, I don't know. But it was cliched, but exactly what she wanted. It was clear. I thought the story was beautiful. And all these years later, obviously, the impression has stayed with me. I have no idea why meeting and talking to Brienne was easy for me. She was, after all, the first trans person I had ever met or talked to. Maybe I just liked her. She was likable. And I had a lot of compassion for her and the situations she had lived through. I don't believe that I had to think about our first principle to afford her a full measure of dignity and worth as a person. It was just there for me. And as I've said, it was easy and spontaneous. Well, being a somewhat cerebral religion, we Unitarians, generally overeducated demographic, I think many of us tend to hew to a hyper-rational approach to the world. believing that thinking is the way to get through most every situation or solve any problem. So it might sound like, if only we can think about something correctly, then we will conquer any related difficulty. And in this context, we might believe that thinking could overcome any biases preventing us from fully living out that first principle I've referred to. Well, I'm here to tell you that I don't believe that. Well, sure, most of the time, thinking is indispensable. I'm going to go with that. And it's a far better approach than not thinking, that's for sure. But there are things that thinking cannot help. And not help, not even one little bit. I'm going to tell on myself now. I'm going to tell about a time that no amount of thinking could help me access human acceptance and affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Some years ago, I was in the hospital for over a week, and I was at UPenn. I had a serious heart thing. It's all cleared up, don't worry. But after a few days in the hospital, a nurse was assigned to me, and I couldn't shake an uncomfortable, queasy feeling. I didn't get a list of pronouns, but the RN's name on the board was typically female. Part of me was sure I was looking at a man. And there was a cheerfulness and chattiness that gave me, again, an uneasy feeling. Quite the opposite of what I had experienced with Brienne. I really just wanted to have no contact with that person. I think I couldn't hide what I was experiencing. After 2 days, I had a different nurse. I felt conflicted and guilty and ultimately relieved. Not so much for the small ways that I must have acted unwelcomingly, but for the deep level of revulsion that I had felt. It was beyond thought, almost purely visceral, and I could not explain it. I knew that I could be compassionate and generous with Brienne. Why not also with my trans nurse? Was I really not able to act out of the conviction that every person was due the same respect for their inherent worth and dignity? To know this rationally and simply apply the knowledge like a good you. That stuff was obviously not working for me and wasn't going to. So I fumbled around the dark of my soul, looking for something that might help me. And I was in agony. I felt such great shame. We know that sublimating or pushing down unpleasant feelings or undesirable thoughts does not help us deal with them. In fact, it can only make us more sick and will require us to deal with them again and again. It also doesn't help us to live into our covenant, represented in the 7 principles. It doesn't prepare us better to live in a way that confronts difficult issues that are hidden from our view. If we have a covenant with ourselves, when we hit difficulties, we look for a way to stick with the situation and work on it. Because it's pretty much a guarantee that if we don't, it'll come back again. It will own us. But self-blaming or scolding was not going to help me in that situation achieve greater acceptance. Only acceptance can help us achieve greater acceptance. As the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh has written, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. And so it is with acceptance. Getting a new nurse was not the solution to my situation, nor was thinking about it. It was beyond, or maybe beneath, thought. Unlike thought, where we have, gotten it, and having achieved that, reached our goal, and the journey ends. Slam dunk. The need for this kind of journey is likely to come up over and over, the kind where we need to stick with it. So what do I got? What do I got for that? What are the tools at my disposal? The spiritual practices that I have? Well, one obviously is loving kindness meditation. And it all starts with acceptance of myself. Just exactly as I am at that moment. And wishing myself well. As well as those who are dear and close, those who are known to me but I am not close to, those who are not known to me, and those who are difficult or wish me harm. And ultimately, all beings that can suffer. If you'd like to, at this moment, let's pause and try that loving kindness again. If you want to close your eyes and repeat the words to yourself. May I be safe and free from harm. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be happy. May I be well. May I know joy and be free from suffering. See if that feeling can take root in you. Maybe when you need it, you can find some thread of it, and it can aid you. Returning to the room again, gently opening your eyes. I recently came back from Colorado after spending 7 days in a mostly silent retreat, one that focused on intensive meditation, practice, and instruction. The Mountain Retreat Center was an ideal location, and the rarefied air at 8,000 feet seemed to make each session's meditation even so much more rarefied, too. It was a rare opportunity for me that I especially wanted to take seriously and commit myself to. I believed if I did that, I would get the most out of it. And so it was a sort of short-term covenant with myself. To practice being silent, sticking to the cushion for boredom, discomfort. Whatever your familiarity is with meditation, you almost certainly have heard the idea that the goal of meditation is to empty your mind, to stop your thoughts, still the monkey mind. This is something I am quite sure is completely impossible. As long as you're conscious. But the fact of this impossibility, the fallacy of being able to have no thoughts, is a very good basis on which to begin a meditation practice. Why, you're asking? Good question. Well, we know with a certitude that our minds will wander off and that our thoughts will have their own way with us. One major meditation practice is to take a point of focus, for example, your breath, and just notice it, focus on it, and follow it. When your mind starts to wander and you realize that you have been working on your shopping list or problem solving that situation with your colleague, or fantasizing about the great retirement you'll be enjoying when you finally buy that apartment in Paris, not a problem. Simply come back to the breath. What is key to realize is that the focus on the breath is not what is important at all. Of course, it could be any focus. But whatever you pick, that's not what's important. What's important in our context of covenant with ourselves is that each time our mind wanders and we realize it, we are gentle with ourselves. Each time our mind slips away from our point of focus and starts thinking of other things, we do not lose our patience and get irritated when we realize this. We don't beat ourselves up or get angry and criticize ourselves, scold ourselves, tell ourselves that we'll never learn how to meditate, or that we are always screwing everything up. Instead, we forgive ourselves and start over. As meditation instructor Jack Kornfield has written, we pick up the puppy and return to the breath. Our wandering mind is like a puppy. And you know how puppies are. And our minds are wandering all the time, just like those puppies. So this picking up of the puppy is a simple form of loving kindness that we all can give ourselves. It helps us to create a reserve of love and compassion for dealing with ourselves. And we then have this reserve available when we deal with others too. So making and keeping covenant with ourselves helps us, chip by chip, to feed the human spirit and heal the world. Start by wishing yourself well. Then those dear and close to you. Then those who you know but are not close to. Those who you do not know, who are difficult and may wish you harm, and ultimately all beings. How can we covenant together to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person if we don't love ourselves enough to be able to extend that dignity to people who we are uncomfortable being around? People who even may revolt us. People who no amount of thinking will help us accept. Well, our friends and family is a good place to start. And your religious community. Live in powerful covenant within Beacon, within this congregation. And I'll tell you, this living in covenant is definitely hard work. It forces us to look at attitudes and thoughts that are hidden and uncomfortable to admit that they belong to us. Because we like to think of ourselves as good people. Of course, you're all good people. And having questionable thoughts or feelings makes us question our goodness. Oh, and by the way, watch out not to promise too lightly or too quickly when you agree to live in covenant. Because whenever and wherever promises are made, you betcha there are going to be apologies to make too. So we need to be ready to apologize, and a little bit of compassion and generosity will go a long way there. It will be awkward and uncomfortable, and at times we would rather turn our heads away from these things because aren't we taught or learn through osmosis somehow to avoid discomfort and uncomfortable people? So, why? So what? Why pledge these things? Because only by learning how to do those things can we live up to what we have been called to do. After all, what are we putting at risk? Nothing? No, I think we're putting something serious at risk. And we have to ask ourselves, what is our skin in the game? To feed the human spirit and heal the world. Because if we're not about that, then we are liars. And we're good people, so we're not liars. But it's not easy. And this is a gigantic, seemingly impossible task. Heal the world? We're just, 500 people who come to Summit once every week or however many times you come. But it's what we say we're about. And this is what's at risk. Because if we are called to do this, we better be doing something about it. So what tools do you have to help yourself with this Herculean task? How can you help heal the world? Do you have any tools that are powerful enough to do that? So we may throw up our hands and say, no effing way. I'm out of here. That is too big. This is too big for me, too big for us, too hard to do on our own. Well, for me at least, forgiving myself for losing track of the breath, that's a start. And loving kindness meditation too, that's a start. I actually had the Wonder Box Kuan Yin sculpture, that very one, on the side table when I was in the hospital at UPenn, where I had that difficult experience with that trans nurse. And she did not help me at all. Damn her. Nevertheless, what a powerful relief. The idea of having assistance to do something that seemed impossible to do on my own. And I know it's just a metaphor. I'm not a theist, right? But it was Kuan Yin after all, so, she's pretty powerful. Look what she did, according to the stories. I think we all know this saying that I'm going to speak, even if we haven't heard it just so. You know those things that you just didn't hear before, but as soon as you hear it, you're like, yeah, I know that. All right, and this is one of them. We can only love ourselves to the extent, we can only love others to the extent we love ourselves. Kind of makes sense. You can only ride your bike as well as you know how to ride your bike. It's kind of it's tautology, really. So maybe that is the hard work of making and keeping covenant with ourselves. a promise to find ways to love ourselves so that we can better love others. Start by wishing yourself well. Then those dear and close to you, those who you know but are not close to, those who you do not know, those who are difficult and who may wish you harm, and ultimately all sentient beings. Sometimes Kuan Yin is depicted as having 10,000 arms. In Chinese culture, whenever you say 10,000, it means infinite. Yiwan is that's the way they say it. So she has 10,000 arms and a fan of 10,000 peacock feathers behind her. On the top of each peacock feather is an eye. The eyes in the peacock feathers represent her ability to see all the suffering everywhere in the world. The 10,000 arms represent her ability to aid all people who need help. Sometimes she's called the goddess of infinite compassion and generosity. Imagine if we had that. Or even 1/10,000th of that. Compassion and generosity. If we are seeking to be our better selves, she's a pretty cool model of compassion and generosity. And I borrow her all the time, literally. It's just a metaphor. But for me, it really works. She's an inspiration to look to when things are difficult for me. So how can being powerfully in covenant with ourselves help when it comes to doing the hard work of being in covenant with each other at Beacon? Well, ideally, this is a private and solemn promise for ourselves alone, nobody else's business. It's so unique and individual to each of us. Whatever you have for that, it only works for you, and you don't need to borrow anybody else's stuff. But it will take humility, and it will take strength, and unflinching curiosity about yourself, and it will take courage. And so, maybe this work is an inside job. Maybe it starts first in our own hearts and minds. And our ability to fulfill on any congregational covenant, or even our sacred 7 principles, is only as strong as the foundation laid down in our hearts and minds and our commitment to understanding ourselves. Does making and keeping covenants with yourself mean something different to you now than before you arrived at Beacon this morning? What covenants with yourself do you feel you need to be made and kept? And what tools do you have to help yourself keep those covenants? It's a good idea to have some. So may it be.